Hey everyone, at the end of slides in session 2, which we talk about process analysis, you can find a practice example called insurance applications. The answer to that example, as well as all other examples in our class, can be found in the after class slides, which are visible to you after the session. However, the purpose of this video is to walk you through the solutions to that example. So in this example, an insurance application is considered, which consists of two forms: Form 1 or F1 and Form 2 F2. Now, the rest of the example describes the process in which, upon receipt, each application is first processed, recorded, and separated into Forms 1 and 2. This is done by a data entry clerk. Then the Forms 1, they go a different route. They are screened first by a staff called Staff A, and then restricted by Staff B. The first step is going to take 20 minutes, and the second step is going to take 10 minutes. Now, Forms 2, they go through a different route, and there they are only restricted by Staff C, for whom this takes 15 minutes per application. Now, at the end of this, they all go through one step. So Forms 1 and 2, they all combined, and they go through approval step by a loan officer, and it takes 15 minutes for that loan officer to approve these applications. And we should remember that there are two loan officers. Now, what we are interested to do is to first draw a process flow diagram, right? And then find the capacity, cycle times, and flow times for each stage of the process. So that's what I'm going to do. The first thing is, what we are going to have to do is we are going to have to draw the steps that are there for these loan applications. So the first step is obviously a data entry step, in which all the applications are going to be processed, recorded, and separated into F1 and F2. And then after the separation, they go to different routes. So F1s, the first forms, are going to go for a screening step, and then they go for a risk rating step. Right? Forms 2, they go through only one step, which is risk rating. You can think about this as, the high quality forms which basically don't need to be screened versus the low quality forms that need to be screened. Or you can think about this as forms that the insurance company has records for their clients before, and they don't need this screening. They are the F2. Versus, for new clients that need to be screened first for the quality of the form, right? Now, after these processes are ended, they all combine to go through the approval process, okay? And then the process is finished. Okay. Now, another thing that is very important to draw in a process flow diagram is basically what are the resources, right? So we need to basically describe exactly what resource does each step. So we know that the data entry is done by a data entry clerk, right? We know that the screening for Forms 1 is done by Staff A, the second by Staff B, and risk rating for Forms 2, F2s, is done by Staff C. And of each of these resources, we only have one. Whereas for the resource that does the approval process, the loan officers, we have two. Okay, that's going to be important when we want to calculate the capacity of this approval step. The next thing that we want to put on the process flow diagram is how long does it take for each of the resources to do the process for each application, right? So for the data entry clerk, it's going to take 8 minutes. Okay. For staff A to screen forms 1, where it's going to take 20 minutes. For staff B, it's going to take 10 minutes per application. It's very important that we put 20 minutes per application. It's very important that we put the units here as well. For risk rating F2s, staff C is going to take 15 minutes per application. And finally, the approval process is going to take 15 minutes too per application. Okay. The final thing that we need to do when it comes to having a process flow diagram is we need to define where in this process there is a potential for buffers. Now, we know that before every possible step, we might, depending on how long that step is going to take, we might have a buffer, which is basically process or flow units waiting to be processed. So there is a possibility and potential that there is going to be a buffer before each process. Now, is this going to happen? For example, do we know that actually, given this data, the fact that, for example, staff A is going to take 20 minutes and staff B is going to take 10 minutes, are we going to actually have flow units waiting to be risk rated here? Well, the answer is no, because screening step is a slower step than the risk rating step. It's going to take 20 minutes. In other words, its capacity is actually lower than the capacity of risk rating, and therefore, actually, we are not going to see a buffer here. There is a potential depending on if it's going to take exactly 20 minutes versus 10 minutes for risk rating. However, with these numbers, we are not going to have any buffers. Now, that's going to be a level of detail that you might or might not want to go into, depending on whether or not in the question it is asked of you to do that. I'm just trying to tell you, there is always a potential, depending on the numbers, to have a buffer before different steps. However, given the actual numbers, that buffer might or might not actually materialize. Now, the next thing, so this is what our process flow diagram looks like. So it's actually complete. The next thing that we would like to do is we would like to calculate the cycle time, capacity, and flow time for each of our processes. Now, we know that we have the data entry clerk doing the data entry for each application for 8 minutes per application, and there is only one clerk. So remember, here what we have is every 8 minutes, if we have ample demand, if we have demand that is not choking our process, demand is coming, right? Every 8 minutes, theoretically, we are going to have one application that goes out of the data entry process. That means that the cycle time for the data entry process is going to be 8 minutes. What about the flow time? Well, the flow time is exactly the same thing as well. Each application is going to spend 8 minutes, exactly 8 minutes in the data entry step. Therefore, the flow time for that step is going to be 8 minutes too. Now, notice the units, guys. Units is very important. For these two, the units are time, and therefore we are going to have to use units of time. Okay. Now, for the cycle time, this is 8 minutes per application. So we are going to have to use the units of time per application. Now, you might want to have the per application or not. That's okay. All I'm trying to ask you is to be mindful of the units that you have to consider. Finally, when it comes to the capacity, we know that every 8 minutes, one application can come out of this process, right? So what about the capacity of the process in 1 hour, right? So in 1 hour, we are going to have the capacity, I'm going to just put it here, the capacity is going to be 1 hour per 8 minute divided by 8 minutes, and that's 60 minutes divided by 8 minutes, and that's 7.5 applications per hour, right? So 1 divided by 8 application per minute, and that is 7.5 application per hour. So the answer to that is going to be 7.5. And you can actually do this to know that for the screening A, exactly with our cycle time is 20 minutes per application. Our flow time is 20 minutes per application as well. And that means that every hour we can complete 3 applications. For the second step for Forms 1, the one that Staff B does, we have every 10 minutes, 1 application coming out, and therefore and the flow time for that process is 10 minutes as well. And because every 10 minutes we have 1 application coming out, the capacity for that is going to be 6 applications per hour, right? Again, it's important to note the units. And for Staff C, the step that Staff C does, rating Forms 2, it's going to be exactly the same thing. 15 minutes cycle time, 15 minutes flow time, and that means 4 applications per hour, right? We're going to have as our capacity. Now, for the approval, it's not going to be that exactly the same, because here we have 2 loan officers, and that's the key. Because each application is going to spend exactly 15 minutes in that process. However, because we have 2 loan officers, we are going to see every 15 minutes 2 applications coming out of the process, and that's going to give us an average of 7.5 minutes per application. So every 7.5 minutes we are going to have 1 application coming out of that process. And here is an example where the cycle time and the cycle time and the flow time are not exactly equal to each other because we have multiple resources. And given that our cycle time is 7.5, that means that we are going to have 8 applications coming out of the process per hour. Another way to calculate this is we could say, because each application is going to take 15 minutes per loan officer, we are going to have 4 applications per hour per loan officer, and that is going to give us 8 applications per hour. Now, given that we have calculated these capacities, so the capacity for the data entry is going to be 7.5, right? The capacity for screening is going to be 3, right? So it's going to be 3, the capacity. Here our capacity is going to be 6, right? And here our capacity is 4, and here the capacity is 8. Okay. Now, the example in the class doesn't ask you this question, but I would like to take us a little bit further and basically try and understand what is the bottleneck of this process. Now, to do that, what we are going to have to do is we are going to have to see what is going to be the output of this route and what is going to be the output of this route, in order to understand the capacity of this part of our process. Okay, so we know that this screening has a capacity of, say, the capacity of 3, right? And risk rating has a capacity of 6. So in this route, the bottleneck is screening. This is the step that determines what's going to be the output of our entire root uproot for the forms 1, right? So we know that every hour in this part there is going to be 3 applications that are coming out. Okay. Now, what about on the lower route? We are going to have we're going to have 4 application F2s that come out of that process. Okay, so every hour we are going to have 7.5 the capacity of the data entry step, right? 7 as the capacity of screening and risk rating step for the two parts, and 8 as the capacity of our approval step. Okay, so what's going to be the bottleneck? It is clear that the bottleneck is in this part of the step. Now, what is it that is basically choking this step and slowing down the output? It is clear that screening is the one that is regulating this whole step. So if I ask you, if you had budget to hire one person, where would you put that person? Your answer should have been to put in the screening for forms 1. So always, in order to increase the capacity of a process, we invest to increase the capacity of the bottleneck, because it is the capacity of our bottleneck that regulates the capacity of our entire process. Now, I hope that explanation was clear. If there is any questions, you should always feel free to contact me either in person or through email. I wish you all the best and an absolutely fantastic, great day. Bye-bye.